I welcome you all to this 8-day session of International Certificate Program on Human Resource Management for Excellence. I feel it's my privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Subhendu Das in this session. Kolkata, with over 37 years of rich corporate experience. He has handled and managed HR, IR, L&D, CSR, corporate communications, corporate affairs, legal portfolios in organizations such as Accenture, Capgemini, Deloitte, managing 32,000 corporate managers in India. He has designed and conducted several organizational surveys in employee engagement, internal customer satisfaction, organizational readiness, and health and climate, enhancement, etc. Consulting. Leading the consulting practice in the areas of people strategy, industrial relations, employee relations, organizational change, learning and development, CSR, talent management, and legal services. In past, he has served as Group President HR at OSL Group, Vice President HR, Paradeep Hospital Limited, and Deputy General Manager, Personnel and Administration at SAIL. He has completed lots of corporate assignments for NALCO, SAIL, MCL, Aditya Birla Group, Hindalco, WELL,
Your audio is not coming, Dr. Bhaktabandhu.
Professor Das,
Yes, yes.
your voice is not audible.
Now it is audible.
Now, when you're talking, it is audible, but last 5-6 minutes also in between, your voice was not audible.
The introductory mark.
A few sentences were audible, then again your voice got cracked, and again you were audible. So there is some disturbance.
Okay, should I start now again?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to the 8-day session of International Certificate Program on Human Resource Management for Excellence. I feel it's my privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Subhendu Das in this session. Dr. Das is an alumnus of University of Delhi and IISWPN Calcutta with over 37 years of rich corporate experience. He has handled and managed HR, IR, L&D, CSR, corporate communications, corporate affairs, legal portfolios in organizations. He is a certified lead auditor in IMS and certified psychometric analyst from PRISM. He has trained over 32,000 corporate managers in India. He has designed and conducted several organizational surveys in employee engagement, internal customer satisfaction, organizational health and climate, impact assessment, customer feedback, productivity enhancement, etc. Dr. Das is a people management expert, spiritual scientist, solution explorer, professional trainer, and inspirational speaker. Currently, he is the founder and managing director of PTC Consulting, leading the corporate experience in the areas of people strategy, industrial relation, employee relation, organizational change, learning and development, CSR, talent management, and legal services. In past, he has served Group President HR at OSL Group, Vice President HR Paradeep Phosphate Limited, Deputy General Manager Personnel and Administration at SAIL. He has completed lots of corporate assignment for NALCO, SAIL, MCL, Aditya Birla Group, Hindalco, VAIL, BEL, NMDC, NTPC, IFCO, IFCI, Nuclear Power Corporation Limited, Naval Dockyard Mumbai, Paradeep Phosphate Limited, OHPC, OPTCL, OMC, Prasar Bharati, TIS Mumbai, Advantage, Juari Agrochemicals Limited, Mangalore Chemicals and Fertilizer Limited, Simon India Limited, etc. Dr. Das is a life member of NHRDN, ISTD and IIRA. Sir, we welcome you to this platform. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bhaktabandhu, and welcome you all to this exciting session on industrial relations to employee relations. So, is my voice audible to you all clearly?
Sir, it is audible.
Okay, good. And is my PPT also visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. So, friends, let me tell you that why you should listen to me today on this topic of industrial relations and to employee relations. And I must thank all of you, those who have shared your personal profiles as to who you are and what you are doing right now. So I find a very interesting mix of participants, starting from some students who are yet to join the corporate jungle, I would say. Secondly, there are some practicing professionals ranging with experiences from 1.5 years to even 24 years on varied functional areas. Some are faculties from academics. They are either teaching HRM or they are keen to know IR. Some are practicing IR professionals, some are practicing talent acquisition. So there is a very interesting mix of participants here. And to address such a mixed participant, it's a really daunting and challenging task for me. So that's why you should listen to me on this particular topic. You see, in your work life, have you ever faced that a dead body has been brought and kept in front of the head of organization in the mines? Somebody met with a fatal accident and a dead body was kept in that.
Sir, excuse me, PPT is not visible.
Pardon?
PPT is not visible now.
I have not yet started the PPT.
Okay, sir. Okay.
I'll come to that.
Thank you. Yeah.
My PPT is not totally visible.
The first page also. Yeah, it's visible now.
Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is, a person who has handled very tough situations in corporates, in manufacturing industries, in mines, in ferroalloys, in fertilizer and chemicals, in services industry. So how are you going to trust somebody who has managed such situations? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a video, and I'm sure most of you must have heard about this incident which happened on 18th of July 2012 in Maruti Suzuki plant in Manesar. So watch this video.
It's now a familiar story which hits the headlines with amazing regularity. Labor troubles at Maruti's Manesar factory, the plant forced into a shutdown, the company forced to take off production losses.
Is the audio
But
bit?
what's the real story behind this recurring trouble?
Yes,
Is
sir,
it about
working.
size unions? Is it about mismanagement of the company and its contract workforce? Or does it actually go much beyond that? Does it link into India's archaic labor laws? Ruchita Saxena takes deep.
Labour unrest showing its ugly face once again at the country's largest car maker, Maruti Suzuki, and its Manesar plant in Haryana, now infamous for labour unrest. What started out as a seemingly minor scuffle over a suspended technician took a political and ugly turn, claiming the life of an HR executive and burning down an office at the plant. Maruti is no stranger to labour trouble. This is now the fourth such incident at the plant in the last 1 year, pointing to a deeper issue that Maruti and labour unions have been unable to resolve peacefully. The issue is simply one of wages. At the Manesar plant, Maruti Suzuki has employed 3,000 permanent workers and 2,800 contract workers. For workers employed by Maruti, the minimum wage is 23,000 rupees a month, but for contract workers, it's much lower at about 9,500 rupees per month.
Most important reason behind all this is this deployment of a large number of workmen on jobs of menial nature and paying them only 1/3 of what is being paid to the regular worker.
Contract workers have always resented this wage difference, and with the alleged support of political forces in the region, unions have been emboldened into disrupting operations time and time again. For instance, last October, when the plant remained shut for 14 days, at that time the Maruti management took the tough call of phasing out contract workers despite the higher cost by March 2013. And while the management says they are on track, trouble has struck once again before they could meet their objectives.
Drastically reduced.
At the moment, perhaps our long-term thinking is that we'll be more shifting towards our own manpower. And in that sense, perhaps there will be an effort required to recruit people.
But the story is not one-sided, and the blame does not lie entirely at the doorstep of labour unions. At the heart of the problem are outdated laws that allow for the exploitation of contract workers, not just by corporates, but also perhaps the government. Under current laws, each state is free to decide the minimum wage for contract labourers, and any kind of social security and benefits are left purely to the discretion of the corporates. According to lawyers, this often leads to unfair treatment of contract workers, making it imperative to modify our outdated labour laws. The outdated labour laws have drawn the government's attention, and there is some hope that things could change in favour of workers during the current 5-year plan. According to the Planning Commission's working group, from 2012 to 17 5-year plan on labour laws, the Contract Labour Act 1970 needs to be amended to give contract employees same benefits and security of tenure as regular employee. Minimum Wages Act 1948 amendment can ensure a national minimum wage for all contract labourers in the country. And the Factories Act 1948 can be amended to provide better security for labourers working in hazardous environment.
As of today, some laws are to be definitely changed, and we have recommended in our these meetings. And it is now upon the Parliament to pass it in accordance with the law of the request.
But in return, companies are demanding greater flexibility in hire and fire laws, without which it becomes difficult for companies to adjust operations and production to changing demand dynamics. Current law does not allow companies this freedom, and hence they resort to hiring contract workers who are easier to bring on and let go as required. The outdated labour laws have also had an impact on India's employment scenario, with the unorganized sector now representing 92% of Indian workers, suggesting that a lot of employment opportunities have gone into the unorganized sector.
That I think relates to that closure of factory. Some unit goes bad, or they can't run, they are in loss, then they have to seek permissions. Then retrenchment is there, but at the same time, the labor interest has to be watched.
Until any significant changes in the law, the workers of Manesar plant, even those not involved in the violence, are terrified to go back to work, and so are the managers of Maruti Suzuki. All this while the company is losing 60 crore rupees a day. Its dealers are running out of Swift and Desire cars to sell, and as the family of HR executive Avnish Kumar Dev owns his death, this could be a cue for the government to fast-track amendments required in labour laws long ignored in India. Ruchita Saxena, ADTV Profit.
Okay, friends, all of you have watched this video. So can somebody respond to this video by unmuting their audio and comment on this? How many of you have heard this incident? Anybody?
Yes, sir. I have heard this incident.
Can you please mention your name, please?
Sir, my name is Guru Bandhu. During that time, I was working with organizer from last 2 years, and same was my profile. That's why I was very keen to know what exactly had happened there and how can implement that in my organization. Because during that time, the strength of labor was around 2,000 with my organization. And all our contract labor, that's a construction industry. So I was very keen to understand that exactly practical things of IHR is being implemented here, sir.
Okay, good, good. Thank you, Guru Bandhu. Anybody else would like to respond to this video? You can unmute and speak. Anybody else? Okay, since there is no response, I presume others may not be aware of this incident. So what I'll tell is, this incident took place on 18th of July 2012 in the Maruti's Manesar plant in Haryana. Just to mention a bit of background why this situation ultimately culminated to this violent, which resulted to the death of a general manager, HR. There was one guy called Sonu Gujjar. He was a local leader who demanded the right to establish an alternative union, being unhappy with the activities of the existing union. And since late 2011 and early 2012, so they tried to demand that we want to form a separate union. So what happened? Management clandestinely, without any transparency, they offered golden handshake to this Sonu Gujjar and about 12 others who were a part of him. Subsequently, the matter brewed. The union demanded almost 3 times of basic wages, huge allowances, changes in leave, and other facilities, so which was virtually not possible for any management to accept. So what happened? One day, there was also another dimension, because IR is a very interesting subject. It is not only management and employee-employee relation will come to see. Even the social fabric, the cultural factors also play. What happened? One of the supervisors, he misbehaved with one of the subordinate workers who was of a lower caste. And that incident brewed to a very violent situation. And ultimately, there was rampage, about 700 computers were damaged. So a lot of things were destroyed. And the GMHR, who was confined to a room, he was being trashed. His arms, his legs were broken, and they lit fire, and that guy suffered choking and burned to death. It was such a horrible incident that the managing director and the MD and CEO of Maruti Suzuki India, Mr. Shinjo Nakanishi, he said that he had never seen such a horrible violence in Suzuki Motors' entire global operations, because their Suzuki operations are spread across all over the world. starting from Hungary, Indonesia, Spain, Pakistan, Thailand, Malaysia, China, Philippines, and in India. So it was such a dastardly act. So having known this, the question comes that why there should be an industrial relations. Let me take you back to the history. There are some, I'm sure some of the academicians are also here for their interest. The classical economist model, they told that all the disputes across the globe happen for three main things. One is the land, second is the capital or the money, and third is for the labor who put in their hard work to earn capital for the landlords. Coming to the history of industrial revolution, as you maybe some of you may be aware, in the 18th century, the industrial revolution started in the Great Britain. Subsequently, in 1850, it happened in Germany. And thereafter, it happened also in Sweden and Japan in 1870. And then it spread to France, Belgium, and United States of America in 1873. So in this industrial revolution, two things clearly emerged, and those are the two classes. What are those two classes? One is the capitalist, and second is the working population. So in this scenario, there are some dominant trends which emerged, and one of them was loss of freedom for the workers. Workers did not have the freedom to choose how to work, when to work, on all those things. They were forced to work in unhygienic working conditions, very shanty locations. There's no light, no ventilation, nothing. Even children were exploited to work. Children were employed. And there was a doctrine of laissez-faire, that is free for all, that capitalists can do anything. So there was a freedom of contract, the market dynamics was totally wide open, and all these capitalists, they pursued their self-interest. And this industrial revolution created a humongous impact on the industries. So as a process of this industrial revolution, an entrepreneurial elite class emerged out of this, and that led to the downfall of cottage industry because more and more machines were employed. So more and more machines produced a lot of productivity, huge production, and large-scale industries emerged during this industrial revolution. There are two classes, as I said. One is the haves or the capitalists, and the others are the have-nots, the workers. And there's a lot of interdependence between different work, because in a manufacturing setup, one unit is linked to another. So a lot of specialized interrelated tasks came up, and there was strict discipline in the way of work. People were forced to work for not only 8 hours, more than that. Lot of unhygienic, harsh working conditions were there. Living conditions was very poor, and people left their houses, left their places, and people were moving from one place to another in search of job and livelihood. So the question next comes, what is industrial relations? Let's look at this diagram. First of all, in an economic environment, especially most of the world countries were developing. India also is a developing country, and it has a market situation like countries like Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East, Asia Pacific region. So a lot of countries, the market situation also is in a volatile state. The employment issue is growing day by day. More and more unemployment with the explosion of population is coming up. So all this is creating an economic scenario. Secondly, we have a social scenario. As I said, some people, the capitalists, they have a lot of wealth. Many people are devoid of education, and there are people who are into different classes, like the haves and have-nots. And within the have-nots also, people go by the social strata, the caste, the creed, the religion, the race. So there are a lot of differences which create the social milieu or the cultural environment. Third is the political dimension. As you know, in most of the countries in the world, there are different political parties who have their own interest. And depending on the nature of government, whether it's a democratic or autocratic or a communism, so all these things, appropriate governments are in place who formulate the laws and rules and regulations, and there is a legal structure. Like in India or Africa or in other countries or in the Middle East, you have a legal system where a lot of laws are enacted. So we have an economic situation, we have the social situation, and we also have a political situation. And if you see, all these are also influenced by the fourth estate, or what you call the mass media. And we have a national scenario countrywide, there is a industry-wise scenario, and also company-specific organizational-wide scenario. And all these together form the industrial relations. And the mass media, they also can influence the minds of the people within the organization and outside the organization. As you can see, the video which I showed to you, it was shown by the mass media in a very crisp and crystal way. So all these factors are interlinked. The social factors are linked to the economic factors. Economic factors are linked to the political factors, and political factors are linked to the social factors. Apart from this, if you see, the social factors are also linked to the industrial relations. Similarly, the political factors and the economic factors all are interlinked. But everything has a history and everything has a future. So all these situations have evolved from the past, starting from the industrial revolutions. And those are affecting the current IR scenario. And even the future things which is happening in terms of the technological changes, in terms of the legislative changes, in terms of the open economy, in terms of the GATT and free trade between countries and countries, the future scenario also is going to affect the industrial relations of any country, of any industry, and any organization. So, if you want to understand IR, it basically deals with people. And it is the base of the industry on which all the relations, all the production, operations, productivity, profitability, everything depends on the IR of a company. IR really makes things happen because the wage, the working conditions, everything dictates the operations of the company. And if the IR is peaceful and harmonious, it provides an excellent bottom line and top line for the company, and that provides the cutting edge between similar industries. If you have a company very peaceful, harmonious industrial relations, and another company which is bogged down with a lot of IR problems, so you can imagine which company is going to perform better. And IR deals with people because it is the people. People is the only asset of the company whose values appreciates with time. Otherwise, all other assets depreciates their value with time. So IR is basically a relationship between the employer and employee, or it's also otherwise called as the labor management relations, or simply the labor relations. So to define industrial relations, it is nothing but a process by which people and their organizations interact at the place of work to establish the terms and conditions of employment. Otherwise, it is also called the process of interaction, which traces not just the resulting standard, and finally, the whole process is viewed as a system. because it needs to emphasize the interrelationship among the people, their work organizations, and the standards of the industrial milieu or the environment or the ecosystem in which the organization is operating. International Labour Organization, they virtually cover the most of the part of the globe. According to them, IR is nothing but it deals with either the relationships between the state and employer and workers organization. For example, employers organizations are what? The industrial associations, like you have ASSOCHAM, Confederation of Indian Industry, FICCI, ICC, all these are bodies of employers associations. And workers organization, those are the trade unions. So relationship between the state, the government, state means either central government or the federal government or the state government, state governments, and it is the relationship between them and also between the occupational organizations themselves, interrelationship. So IR also is a very interesting aspect, as you have many players in this game of industrial relations. And the first one of the players is the employees, the workers. They can be either from the organized sector or unorganized sector. They can be from employers and the government. Otherwise, what happens, suppose there is some dispute, then the matter also is taken up by the employers association, like as I said, CII, ASSOCHAM, FICCI, ICC, and in the state level, you have Utkal Chamber of Commerce and Industries and various employers associations and bodies. Apart from that, you have different trade unions who represent the employees. And also, then whenever there is a dispute, the government has provided for various tribunals and labor courts to mitigate this. So all these play together, they based on their interaction, that forms the IR fabric or the IR scenario. Now, if you look at the industrial relationship, it is the relationship between the management, workers, trade unions representing the workforce, and also it also relates to the relationship in the manufacturing and service sector. Another important aspect is IR does not emerge in vacuum. There has to be some players. So what are those? It is born out of the relationship arising out of employment between two persons. And for any relationship, as you know, there has to be two parties. Okay. And for these two parties to have a good environment, to have a better relationship, the industry provides the environment for industrial relations. Industrial relations is a very fascinating subject, and you'll be amazed as to how different study of various subjects is related to IR. For example, IR includes the study of conditions conducive to labor management cooperation. It also includes practices and procedures required to elicit desired cooperation from the workers and management. It also studies the various laws, the labor laws, the rules formed by the governments, different regulations, agreement arrived at between the union and the management, or in case of dispute, the different hours given by the courts or tribunals, or based on the previous customs and traditions. All these includes industrial relations. Apart from that, different policies framed by the government where cooperation between the labor and management are elicited. There are defining rights and obligations from both the parties, and there are various interference patterns of the executive orders and the judiciary orders in the regulations of labor management relations. IR is very broad-based. Various subjects come into this picture. One of them is economics also play a role in IR, where you see the level of wages, the security or non-security of employment, working conditions. History also plays an important role in IR, the traditions, origin and development of industrial relations. Sociology, it also plays a relation because we talk of different social strata, class, color, race, all these social conflicts. Psychology also is applied to industrial relations in a fascinating way, because here you are playing with the attitude, the mindset of the different combatants of the players, like the employer and the employee, the government, the media, everybody's psychology plays a great role. Anthropology, you must be surprising, anthropology in IR. Yes, because it talks of cultural interactions. Political science, as you know, the political system of the country also plays a very vital role in IR. The state policies bearing issues of involving the conflict, law, different acts, different rules, the legal aspect of disputes, international relations, that also plays an important role in IR, because wherever there is international aid, trans-border businesses, all those things comes into picture. Public administration also has an important role in IR because it deals with the degree of effectiveness in which labor policies are administered. Technology, technological aspects like IT, the computers, the digital things. So that also now plays a lot of changes in the mindsets of the people. Mathematics, you must be laughing, mathematics and IR. Yes, because when you deal with lot of statistics, data, wage, you enter into negotiation, so you have to do a lot of crunching of numbers. So there, the quantitative assessment of losses incurred by the parties. Each party calculates how much am I gaining or losing. The negotiation process, the collective bargaining, mathematics plays a role. The country's economy, right? So in industrial relations, you are basically focusing on three broad aspects. What are those things? One is the relationship between the employers and the trade union. Second is the laws relating to employment. And third is the disciplinary procedures and termination of employment. So if this is what is IR, then the question is, how are we going to implement, or how IR is implemented? So let me take you through a operational IR matrix as to how things are happening. First of all, there are four broad pillars of industrial relations on which this entire structure of IR stands. The first pillar is your grievance management system. Of any organization, if you see, the disputes, the problems arise of grievances. So if you have a grievance management, there are two aspects. One is the formal grievance management system. There you have different grievance committees, okay? And the other is the informal grievance management system, where any companies have a HR help desk where people can go and take the help of them to mitigate their grievance, or they have a informal grievance redressal forum. Like some companies, they have a people who can approach the CEO or the head of HR on a fixed time. They can just walk in and share their grievances. Informal system. Second pillar is your participative management system. That means there's a participation between the employer and employees or their representatives. That means the employer or the trade union. So they join together, and there are statutory consultative forums as provided in various acts and laws. What are those things? For example, if in the factories that you'll see that there is a provision of a works committee. There's a provision for canteen managing committee. These you must have. It's a must, a statutory provision. Apart from that, you have bipartite participative forums, which is not a must, but people prefer it to have a bipartite. That means two parties forming different forums. For example, there is a forum at the apex level, at the organizational level, and if there are more than various departments in an organization, then you can also have bipartite forums at different shop floor levels or unit levels. Third pillar is the collective bargaining system. Here, in the collective bargaining system, again, you have three aspects. One is at the shop floor level, at the ground level. Second is at the plant level, where you have interaction with unions, and also you have a provision for negotiation and final settlement with the recognized union, if they have a recognized union. And the third one is the statutory framework. And in statutory framework, if something is not settled, if there is some dispute, then you can go to the conciliatory machinery, like the labor officers, they are the conciliation officers, or if that also fails, then you can go for adjudication, either to the labor tribunal or labor court or arbitrations. The fourth pillar is the environment management system. Here you have two types of environment. One is the internal environment within the organization, where you have the trade unions, the associations, the opinion makers, the pressure groups, all those things. And you also have to manage the external environment as well, because in any organization you have a lot of stakeholders. What are these? The society, the people around the organization, you need to manage them. You have to manage the government and the government officials. You need to manage the statutory authorities, like the labor authorities. And also you need to manage the law and order authorities, the district administration, the police, and all those players who really matter to you in maintaining industrial peace and harmony. So this is how the entire operational IR matrix is visible. And if you are clear about this thing, you can manage the entire game within this framework, and you can be an excellent IR manager. You can play the game fantastically. So IR has a lot of scope. Okay, industry, as you know, it's a very social world in a small confined area, because there you have a lot of people who interact and create a relationship, and whose influences really matter to the entire community because of the labor relations, because of the social fabric, economic conditions, the political situations, the moral lives of the people. So industrial relations are a part and parcel of industrial life, because it deals with the relationship between all these things. So there are various objectives of industrial relations. I'll just quickly touch upon those. First of all is promotion and development of a healthy labor management relations. Okay. Second objective is maintenance of industrial peace in the organization, so that the production happens smoothly, seamlessly, the profitability, bottom line, everything should be. And here there are different acts which decides the framework to maintain industrial peace and harmony. Government also enjoys a lot of power to maintain the status quo. There are provisions, as I said, various bipartite, tripartite forums, and these are there available in the code of discipline in industry, the code of conduct, code of efficiency and welfare, model standing orders, which is a must for most of the companies, grievance procedure, granting of recognition status of trade unions as per the Trade Unions Act. So a lot of these things are there. IR is very significant because of its various patterns that emerge. Because in organized sector and in unorganized sector, the patterns are different. Unions play a very vital role in the Indian political system. And as you may be aware, there are various unions which are affiliated to various political parties. And these unions, their members and the people involved in the union are used by the political parties during the electioneering time. They also influence the legislative processes through various lobbying. And national unions are consulted in formulating various socio-economic policies and labor policies. Government of India does that. I have been a part of those from the management side when I was in SAIL. where various unions from different national level like INTUC, AITUC, Hind Mazdoor Sabha, Bharat Mazdoor Sangh, C2. So all those national level parties, their representatives come in and lot of discussions take place to emerge like. And there are various patterns of IR and the status varies based on the workforce, whether they're in public sector or in the private sector. So whenever there is a problem, that means there is some dispute or conflict. And these conflict of interest between the management and labor arises. So the management goal is profit maximization, changes in types of goods introduced, installation of new machines, authoritarian administration, close supervision of workers, all those things, maintenance of discipline. So management wants to have their own way. And similarly, the workers also have their own sets of demand like stability in income, security of employment, protection of skills, improvement in the status, sharing in the management of enterprise. Okay, so workers also have their own demands. So when these do not match, then you have a dispute. And there are various types of dispute. One is interest dispute. Second is the grievance dispute. Third is unfair labor practices. Fourth is recognition dispute, where different unions fight each other to gain recognition by the management, because they ultimately the settlement for collective bargaining is signed with the recognized institution. So what are the causes of industrial conflict? First is the political situation. If there is political instability or the union is affiliated to different political parties, industrial dispute or conflict rises. Second is the social aspect. Social cause means if there is a low morale in the society, in the social values and norms, if there is a class disparity, or if there is a difference between the rich versus poor, then there is a conflict. Third is the psychological aspect, because if the individual's objective and the organizational objective doesn't match, there's a dispute. If there are motivational issues, personalities issues, or attitudinal issues, then there is a conflict. Fourth is the legal dimension or the legal cause, inadequacy of legal machineries, then there can be conflict. Fifth is the market situation, rising prices, shortage of supplies, that creates disputes. Sixth is the technological cause, because if you adopt technology which is unsuited to a particular industry or the people, then there's a dispute. Difficulty in adoption of a new technology, and normally as you see, whenever any new technology comes, the people resist the changes because they fear of unemployment, they may lose their jobs. And the last one is the economic aspect. The wages, the bonus, the overtime payment, all these cause a lot of conflict. So in industrial conflicts, there are some industry-related factors, okay, like employment, privileges, all these are industry-related factors. Second is the failure to pay need-based wages, inadequate or unjustified wage sectors. So all these are industry-related factors. Apart from that, there are some management-related factors, like the management is unwilling to discuss dispute, or unwillingness to recognize a particular trade union, or non-delegation of enough authority by the recognized trade unions. So like all these things. And third, there are some government-related factors because of the change in economic policies or privatization, or now there is also something going on which I will touch upon at the end, because the new labor codes are coming. So all these causes conflict. And there are other causes where politics influence the trade union movement, or political instability, or even center-state relationship, if there is a strained relationship. Rampant corruption also is a factor. So all these causes conflict. And to manage this conflict, one goes for collective bargaining. And there are various types of collective bargaining. I'm not going to touch upon this in detail because of the paucity of time. But There are 4 types of collective bargaining, just for your information. One arises because of the wage and women issues. Second arises because of the job security issues. Third is the productivity issues, and fourth is the quality of work life. All these are classified on the basis of the nature of the disputes or issues, or the objectives of the issues. And these collective bargaining can be practiced depending on the different situations of the organizations. There's a process of bargaining, as you know. For any kind of negotiation or collective bargaining process, you have to start with the preparation, discuss with the opposite party, propose what you are going to offer, then negotiate, have a hard bargain, and ultimately arrive at a settlement. So now, friends, I hope the case study relating to Bata India, which I gave to you yesterday, I believe all of you must have gone through it, right? So, if you have gone through, I would like to spend about 5-10 minutes on this to see what are your responses on this first question. So anybody can unmute their audio and respond to this question. Yes, friends, who is going to respond to this question? Are you all listening?
Participants, please respond.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please mention your name and respond to this.
Yes, sir. My name is Swati.
Swati.
Yes.
Welcome, Swati. What is your response to this question?
Sir, I read through the case study. Sir, the person who was in charge had maybe he was successful and he had a very good strategy, but understanding the culture and the economic political changes of India was one of the drawback for Bata. That was my opinion with regard to the case study, sir.
Okay. No, they're coming to this particular question in September 2000. The Bata Mazdoor Union asked the West Bengal government to intervene in the alleged downsizing exercise of the management. Was the union justified in seeking government intervention? And what do you think are the pros and cons of outsourcing for Bata in the light of poor IR conditions? Any response on this? Anybody can come up.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes?
Am I audible, sir?
Please louder. Lopamudra.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, now. Yes.
Yes, sir. My opinion is it is really not appreciable the team proposed to government. Rather, I feel there is a lack of presence of a higher person who could have managed well.
Okay. Anybody else? Good, good. It's a good attempt. Yes, anybody else would like to respond to this? Since nobody is responding, I'll presume that nobody has gone through this case yesterday, or maybe today, the first half. Because I was expecting that you must have gone through, and I was expecting a very good interaction and discussion. Because you see, even if we are in a virtual platform, there is tremendous scope for interactive discussions to make it lively and interesting. Because I don't feel happy that it has to be only a one-side communication.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Sir, I'm Anandama. So regarding this question, union seeking government's intervention was not justified. My thought is we could have approached the management, sat with them for the discussion, then they could have taken it further. But they directly approached the government to intervene in between when Bata was looking at downsizing. And the second one is, what do you think the pros and cons of outsourcing for Bata? Bata had all the options, resources here to manufacture by itself, but just they wanted to close down the plant in West Bengal. They just wanted to put this as an outsourcing technique to get out of this headache. So it was like, it was more of getting relief from this branch and trying to say we are going to outsource all the material from various, like, China is what they have mentioned. So that is what that triggered the movement. It was like, they lost the trust on Bata, saying we could have worked for this, but company is looking at outsourcing, which was not accepted by them. So if they wanted to bring that resistance has to be managed before. That was not done here. That is what I feel.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Excellent, Anandma. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
So let's move on to the next question. Because of the paucity of time, I'm trying to cut short because the time is a constraint over here. Okay. Second is, maintaining good IR have always been a problem for Bata. Why? What do you think Bata can maintain? How do you think Bata can maintain sound IR practices? Anybody to respond on this?
Hello, sir.
Yes, please mention your name.
Swati here again.
Okay, Swati, yes.
Sir, even when the nano car was introduced in West Bengal, they had a huge issue. They relocated the location to Gujarat. They with the IR, with the people and the establishment, everything. Only thing was, when you are able to convince the employees of the organization with the basic financial as well as job security, actually making a good amount of IR relationships. That whenever you are giving a employee job security, that should make employees feel better with any of the issues and making them the prime member in the organization. So I could refer with the nano car things.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. As you see, as I was mentioning, the social and political factor, how it plays on the company's IR situation. So the cultural factor, the social factor, it also has a very vital thing. And apart from that, the attitude of the people in Bata was not very much constructive. Okay, so because of the time, I will drop the other two questions and let us try to move on, right?
Yes, sir.
Now let us move from IR to ER. So let there be a transition from IR to ER. So what is this transition? If you see, employee relations is an area within the entire gamut of human resources management that has seen most change during the last 30 years. And there has been a shift from the IR, which is a collective framework where you have the government player, the trade unions, the employers association, all these are intermingled. So there's a shift from the collective IR to the individual employee relations aspect. So employee relations covers the contractual, the practical, the physical and emotional dimensions of the employee-employer relationship. If you see this transition, it has three important frames of references. One is the unitary approach, second is the pluralistic approach, and third is the radical approach. Unitary means you have a single entity, and that single entity, based on the relationship in the management of the employer, if there is a mismatch of alignment of objectives, then there arises a dispute or a conflict of interest. So that process goes through the processes of the institutional organization in a pluralistic manner, and ultimately it is resulting in terms of various rules and regulations, and then the cycle continues, and as a result of which a system is generated, and that results in the action on the social infrastructure within the organization. So what is employee relations then? Employee relations is nothing but a declining in industrial pluralism and rising of sophisticated unitarism. What it means? It means that this traditional focus on a system of industrial relations or employee relations still retains value as a means of accounting for change. Here what happens, the relationship between the employees or their representatives and employers or their representatives, encompassing all aspects of the work life based on optimum working relationship. For example, suppose you are the IR manager of a company. You are the representative of the employer who negotiates or discuss about some issues with the representative of the employees, that means the trade union, right? So that is the relationship between the employer and employee. So here what happens, all the employers want higher productivity, low cost, mobility, flexibility, and all these things by the workmen. At the same time, the employee or the workers, they want fantastic pay, fair conditions, a lot of perks, facilities, job security, quality work-life balance, everything. So how to have a balance? So ultimately, the employers want and employee want, they are negotiated, and ultimately the outcome what is comes in terms of the negotiated pay and terms and conditions is the outcome of, and that builds the employee relations. There are various aspects of employee relations which contribute to this. For example, the grievance investigation and resolution, that contributes to employee relations. HR strategic planning, on-call HR advisory support, HR audits, union employee management engagement, remuneration advisors, the compensation and benefit designing or benchmarking, HR policies and procedure manuals, employment law, legal counsels, collective agreements, training and development, employment contracts, and if you have on-site specialists. So all these contribute to the employee relations. And what is the role of employee relations? It has, because it provides independent counseling to the employees as an individual or superiors to resolve the work-related problems that may relate to the performance and or discipline-based issues. For example, as new IT and ITS industry started happening, hospitality, I see some of the members here participating are from hospitality industry also, the hotels, service industries, and a lot of service industries are coming up. So as you shifted from manufacturing to all the service industries, so the traditional unions did not exist in these industries. So the management thought that in order to have better relations, we should focus on each of the employees individually. So that's how this role of employee relations is very vital. Second role is administering the staff grievance processes. Third is, in case of any disputes, how to mediate disputes and advise all the parties or sides involved on matters relating to employee relations and HR policies. And also how to monitor the employees' performance management systems, the PMS. Because in PMS, your wages, your compensation and benefits, your increments, your growth, everything depends. So if you look at this framework of employee relations, you have one from the employer side and you have an other from the trade union representatives. So there, both are represented in the board, and then you have a employee relations working committees having representatives from both them, and there's an independent secretariat who helps the functioning of the committee. And from the employer side, you have elected members like the chief executives or the HR guy. From the trade union side, you have the representative, and you also have some local committees depending on the situation. If you have a big integrated plan, each shop floor can have. But if you have a company having units in different geographical location, for each geographical location, you can have a local consultative committee to manage the employee relations. So if the employee relationship goes wrong, what happens? There are a lot of issues that may arise. For example, you may be having excessive unplanned absentees. Some people may watch sexually explicit material by the company internet. People do not show respect or no respect when speaking to their supervisors. So all kinds of issues, as you can see, start arising from all these if the employee relationship is not proper or if something goes wrong. All these you can see can come up. So employee relation, one of the most factor is smooth and air when you are managing the grievances properly. So there are various ways to express your grievances, like passive indifference, apathy, hostility, violence, indiscipline, absenteeism, loitering, and restriction in output. These are ways to express your grievances. Or you can give a written complaint as well. What are the different natures and causes of grievances? Like promotions, somebody has superseded you, or you have been just given only acting but no real benefit in promotion, or there is a seniority issues, or if there is an issue in the pay fixation. Second is the compensation, also is another cause. The various amenities in the organization, that also creates a lot of grievances. Service matters is also another factor which causes grievances. Disciplinary action is taken also, that causes grievances. Nature of job, that also when you compare your job with somebody else, that also creates grievances. And various conditions of work also, that causes grievances. ILO, International Labour Organization, also has classified some of the grievances, like a person can have a complaint of one or more workers with respect to wage and allowances, conditions of work, interpretation of service conditions, overtime, leave, transfer, promotion, seniority, job assignment, and termination of service. This has been classified by the International Labour Organization. So the entire grievance management system, if you see, it starts with the immediate supervisor with whom the person takes up the grievance verbally. The person investigates and conveys the decision within 2 days, if possible. If unresolved, then it again is escalated to one level, to another level, to another level. And ultimately, it goes up to the highest level. That's the grievance management procedure in case of employee relations. So how to resolve the disputes, how the conflicts are manifested. So all these are the different areas where the conflicts are manifested. If you see, if you are having an organized group, organized industry, then the unions and management, they have their own manifestation of issues. You can see in the union side, there are non-cooperation arguments, hostility, stress, unwillingness to negotiate, resentment, absenteeism, all these, morcha, get out, demonstration, loss of production, and ultimately strike. From the management side, there may be unwillingness to withholding of efforts. They want to terminate because of inefficiency, demotion, layoff complaints, lockout breaking rules, strikes, all these things. Similarly, in individual or unorganized conflict, these are the different the issues, how disputes arise. So in India, if you see, the causes of conflict has been, I went to a research report and could find that during 1961 to 99, 3/4 to 2/3 of work stoppages has been due to 5 reasons in India. What are those 5 issues? Wages and allowances, retrenchment of personnel, indiscipline and violence, bonus, leave, and hours of work. These are the 5 broad reasons for conflict in India. There are various legal framework for dispute resolution, and one of them is the Industrial Disputes Act. And there is a provision for a works committee, provision for conciliation officer, or a board of conciliation, or a court of inquiry, or labor courts, tribunals, like you have the state government industrial tribunal and central government industrial tribunals. So these are the legal framework available for dispute resolution. And also you have a national tribunal. Apart from that, there are certain provisions like the notice of change, the power of government to exempt. So there are different sections under the Industrial Dispute Act where all these framework has been provided. So I'm sure before you ask any question to cite any of the best practices in employee relationship, I'm going to cite some examples here. One of the best practices is honest communication. In SAIL Rourkela Steel Plant, during the period of 2000 onwards, there was a mass contact exercise which took place on every Wednesday, where instead of the management making a presentation, one of the senior most worker used to make a presentation before the management, where starting from the managing director to all the executives, top level executives and the workers representative. So they used to make a presentation, plan, communicate the management thinking, the employees thinking, the production, productivity, all these things. And that has given fantastic results in terms of maintaining employees relations. Another best practice is get your team behind the vision. There is also another practice in Durgapur Steel Plant of SAIL. The name of what given was Alokit. Here, the management wants to have a communication between the workers and the executives, has to align their vision as a part of the strategy planning, communication in terms of values, production, productivity, and all. Rourkela Steel Plant also had another best practice in terms of gaining the trust of the people. That program was called Talmail. Here, the CEO used to interact with the frontline executives of the company to check out communication. It's a two-way communication from top to bottom and bottom to top, so that people gain trust over each other. Next is recognition and appreciation. The best performers are recognized and appreciated. When I was in Paradip Phosphates, we used to have annual marketing conferences. There, we recognized before others all those excellent performers in terms of cash and non-cash rewards. Another example is best practices investing in your people. For example, most of the workers who are good and the opinion makers or some of the trade union leaders, they were sent to different training programs as to not only find out what are their rights, but what are their duties for the organization and the people in the organization. Another example of best practices is not to pick favorites or have a bias in the organization. For example, in 2012, when I was Vice President HR in Paradip Phosphates, we introduced the concept of balanced scorecard. And I'm sure during the PMS processes, all of you must be aware of the balanced scorecard. Okay, so by virtue of introduction of that, so there was a change in the perception of the people, and a lot of objectivity came into the PMS. Another best practice is to show the employees that you care for them. For example, when I was there in Paradip Phosphates, most of the house magazines, we have an in-house magazine called Parikrama. So what was happening, that these magazines were distributed to the employees in the offices. And you know, in most of the offices or organizations, what happens? These magazines are left in the office, or people used to tear it and have their lunch or tiffin over that, and ultimately it goes to the dustbin. So most of the families of the employees do not know what is happening in the organization, how their spouses are doing in the organization. So they were totally in dark. So what we did, we collected the names of the spouses of all the employees, and then we saw that the house magazine in a sealed envelope with the name of the spouses mentioned are delivered at the doorstep at the houses. So that made the spouses felt that, oh, they are being given importance. They are also important for the company. So that changed the perception for the organization, and they felt that how much the company is caring for that. So that also is another aspect of developing excellent employee relationship. And the most important is one needs to have a transparent employee relation policy, where you should have an introduction about the company, why there is a need for an ER policy, what are the company's guiding principle in creating such employee relations policies. You should have some sections on the compliances, the do's that has to be done, a section on collective negotiations or industrial relationship, what are the mechanisms for that, the framework, and also a section on disciplinary actions, because there are some misconduct and some mechanism for punishing people who are beyond redemption. So if you really want to manage employee relations, there are certain skills required to be an effective ER manager. For example, you should have tremendous observation capacity, understanding, adapted to various situations, strategic thinking. You need to have capability of analyzing huge data, especially when you are going to negotiate on wage and compensation and other terms and conditions. For managing employee relationship, you need to have tremendous integrity. I'm telling you, if you have tremendous integrity, and if you have transparency, and if you can build your personal credibility, people are going to trust you, and they take your words on face value. So that helps you a lot in managing employee relations. Empathy is a very important aspect, and your communication skills and your approachability. Don't create any false glass ceiling before you, shields. No, let people come, approach you, interact with them. Then only you can get the pulse of the people, and ultimately your leadership. So coming to the future, as you must have seen in the beginning, when we are talking of IR, entire environment, ultimately what is the road ahead for future? In India, things are going to change very fast. As you must have been hearing, 44 central laws are now getting merged or converted into 4 broad labor codes in this year. Already in 2019, code on wages have been implemented. The Gazette notification took place on 8th of August 2019, about a year back. Other 3, occupational safety, health and working condition code is already introduced in the Lok Sabha. Code on social security and IR code, all these 3 has been introduced in Lok Sabha. And all these central laws have been adjusted in these 4 broad codes. And this is going to be a game changer, I'm telling you, for managing employee relationship in India in times to come. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. So I look forward to you for any questions, if you have any, because since I'm unable to see the questions, if somebody can facilitate in reading out the questions, I can answer that.
Sir, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. There are a few questions from the participants. The first one by Abhipsa Misra. He has asked how organization is going to handle different IR issues.
Can you please repeat again? Different IR?
How organization is going to handle different and IR issues.
IR disputes. Your voice is breaking.
Issues.
IR issues. Okay. You see
how organ.
Yes. As I said, dispute arises out of conflict. Okay. And as you must have seen in my presentation, there are various types of dispute. So one has to start with the informal mechanism. If you can create a help desk, the person can come to the individual can be a spoke, single point of contact for the person to take the issue, refer it to the concerned person, follow up, see that it is rectified or the issue is resolved, and then he or she can communicate to the aggrieved employee. That is one. Second is you can go to the higher level person. You can approach somebody informally. If those informal mechanisms fail, then you can raise a formal dispute in writing to the officer who is in charge of grievance management. Okay, that person, as you have seen, it starts from a junior officer. If he or she is unable to resolve, then you escalate into another level higher, ultimate to the topmost level. If that is still not resolved, then you can raise a formal dispute as per the Industrial Dispute Act. Okay, or many companies, for their officers or executives, they don't have a standing order. They have a what you call either the service rules or the conduct, discipline and appeal rules or the ER policy. As I must have seen in the ER policy, I was mentioning that there has to be some portion where dispute resolution mechanism has to be made. So you can take those paths to resolve the dispute formally. And if you exhaust all these informal, formal, everything, then ultimately you can go for adjudication or conciliation mechanism to the tribunals or the labor courts. Again, if you fail that, then you can go to High Court and then ultimately the Supreme Court. So this is the entire what you call the strata from one end of informal to the extreme end of the formal resolution mechanisms. Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. There is a second question. How inter-organizational industrial relations impact the company both positively and negatively?
Inter-organizational, that means, do you mean that one company and another company? Can you unmute the participant who's asked this question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, yes, it is within like intercompany, one company to the other.
Okay. So your question is how inter-industrial conflict can contribute positively and negatively, right?
Sir, yes, sir. It can be conflict also, or in terms of like relationships.
Relationship.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All these industrial lobbies, what you know, for example, all these are you from academics or industry?
They're both.
For both, okay. So I'll give example of both. For example, if you are in academics, you know there is a formal association of all the B schools in Odisha, right? There is a OPEPA. Similarly, all the industries, they have their own body like Utkal Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Okay, there is a industry for plastic industries. There is a body for cement industry. There is a body for steel industry. So each type of industries have their own associations or representative organizations. So when you have any industrial differences or conflicts. So at the industry level, you can collate all the issues, have an internal brainstorming, find out in what way such issues can be resolved. For example, for steel industry, I'll give an example. There is a NJCS body. NJ is National Joint Consultative Committee for Steel Industry. NJCS, National Joint Consultative Committee for Steel Industry, S. Here what happens, you have people both from the management side and the trade union side. And there, all of them discuss issues pertaining to the wage, the benefits, the grades, the job bands, everything, where more than one companies are involved. For example, in this NJCS, you have companies like Steel Authority of India Limited, you have steel companies like RINL, you have companies like VISL, Bhadravati, public sectors. Similarly, these outcomes are also followed by other steel industries in the private sectors like Tata Steel, SR Steel, Jindal Steel, Jindal Stainless, JSW, and lot of other industries in that. So to sum up, you can have different bodies where such disputes from more than one organizations can be taken up and resolved in a very amicable way. Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Great explanation. So, sir, actually, this is basically when we come together. But at the end of the day, they are competitors. Like when you come to private sector, so one employee will leave one organization and will join the other. Sir, how about that? Anything on that, sir? Your point of view, sir?
But here there is no dispute or conflict. Here it's a question of talent attrition. Okay. And talent attrition can be contained again by your progressive policies, HR policies, your compensation and benefit policies. How are you able to retain your talent? Okay, so there, what you can do is, if you really want to take it as a conflict, you can discuss among your employees, Bhaiya dekho, if somebody from my company is approaching your company, or if you're trying to poach somebody from my company, please talk to me before proceeding further. So there you have to establish perfect communication with the peer level industry so that you know in advance whether you can spare that single individual or not. And if you come to know about it in advance, then you can chalk out your own strategy, how you can retain such critical and important talents who are vital for your organization.
Yes, right, sir. Actually, this poaching and blacklisting things exist. Yes, sir. Rightly said. Thank you so much, sir. It's a great presentation. Amazing. Thank you, sir.
Any other question, please?
Okay, sir. Thank you. There is a last question. Yeah, there is a last question from Mr. Banoj Khatwa.
Yes.
Hopefully, he has written differently the question. He asked, what is the redressal time of any dispute by the dispute redressal team?
You see, Mr. Banoj, different companies have set different time frames. It all depends on the individual company when they are framing their HR policies or the service rules or the conduct discipline and appeal rules or the model standing orders. So they provide the time frame at each stage of conflict resolution or dispute resolution that is mentioned in there. So there is no standard time frame, but preferably, as I say, suppose it ranges from a time of 2 days to 10 days or 1 week at each stage of conflict resolution. Beyond that, one should not take much time. And also, whenever there is a disciplinary action, for your information, there are times stipulated in the model standing orders. Like, for example, if an inquiry going on against a charge-sheeted employee, then the inquiry has to be completed within 6 months time frame. Okay. Similarly, if a person has been charged with a major penalty, then he has to reply within 3 days. Okay, or 72 hours. So like this, different companies has their own version of time limits for resolving disputes or conflicts. Am I clear, Mr. Banoj? Hello?
Mr. Manoj Khatwar. Mr. Manoj,
Is it there?
are you clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for this enlightening session. We are really indebted to you.
And I must thank all
And
the
all the
participants.
participants.
Yeah, thank you. I must thank you, Dr. Bhaktabandhu Das, for providing me this opportunity. And also, I must thank all the participants to be very active and patient in hearing me or listening me. It is up to them whether they have really listened or heard me. And in case any of them need any help and support, my contact coordinates are there in the screen. You can take a screenshot and you can contact me for any help and support. Thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure interacting with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Dear participant, tomorrow there will be a session on HR analytics in practice by Mr. Prakash Panda. He is the senior HR at India Power. So you all are requested also to be present in that particular session, because that will be also another interesting session and one of the most promising area of the contemporary HR. So till then, thank you so much. We'll meet tomorrow.